Okay, I'm starting the session. Maybe we can wait one more minute, or we can just go. Maybe just go, right? So the session, Arrested Welcome, Hospitality in Contemporary Art. I'm Simone Ostov, the director of S3A. Very happy here to introduce both Irina and Jorge. So I will read Jorge bio, he'll talk, and then I'll do Irina's, and then she'll talk, and then we have a conversation. So Jorge Lucero is an artist born, raised, and educated in Chicago. He currently serves as chair and associate professor of art education at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Lucero's books include Mere and Easy, Collage as a Critical Practice in Pedagogy, Teacher as Artist in Residence, the Most Radical Form of Expression to Ever Exist, and the forthcoming, What Happens at the Intersection of Conceptual Art and Teaching. He's the author of numerous peer-reviewed articles and chapters in books. Lucero has exhibited, performed, and taught all over the US and abroad. He received his degrees from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and Penn State University. He is co-editor of the International Journal Visual Arts Research and sits on editorial boards of 3 other journals: the Journal of Social Theory in Art Education, the Journal of Cultural Research in Art Education, and the Journal of Curriculum and Pedagogy. Welcome, Jorge.
Thank you so much. I'm immediately going to hop over to share screen just so that we can use all of our time as best as possible. Is this sharing properly? Pliable institution. Thank you. There is so many things that I could talk about in this particular context around these themes. So many projects that I think I've engaged with that touch on some of these topics. I was trying to pick the things that I felt were most in direct conversation with Dr. Aristarkhova's book. It's a book that I have enjoyed reading and have actually found it very, the phrase that I keep using is permission giving. And I'll explain what I mean by that, just because I feel like so many of the other things that I'm going to talk about today are threaded in some way or another around this idea of permissions. It's very simple, actually. It's the idea that a lot of artists and a lot of creative practitioners are familiar with, which is the idea that you could look at something or examine something or read or think about something or be told a story about something, and that the thoughts that you have about it, whether they're right or wrong thoughts, open up your imagination, and that imagination gives you permissions to behave in certain ways that you probably wouldn't have done otherwise. And for me, my whole reconceptualization of art from a very young person has come through these incremental permissions. It's just like one permission after another. I see something, and then in my brain, what happens is I have this thought, and the thought is usually, oh, I didn't know that I could do that. And then even though I maybe don't move right away into it and start to work in that way, I catalog the permission in my head. And it helps me both as an artist, because it opens up the pliability of things that perhaps at first seem unpliable, materials that seem unpliable, things that seem unpliable, but also as a teacher, because usually as a teacher, you're working with so many different types of perspectives, so many different personal histories, people's own subjectivities, that it helps to be able to have a large lexicon of permissions that you could then sort of hand out as appropriate. They're almost like little recipes or things that you can give out for people to try. So I decided to just talk about 5 things that I've done. I didn't put them in chronological order. I maybe put them in the order that I thought was relevant to the conversation. And the first one was just one I'm going to show the whole thing in one slide. It was a piece that I called Dawn Lines. And what it was I put in a proposal to present a paper at the 2014 Zizek conference at the University of Cincinnati. And in my proposal, partially because I didn't actually want to go to the conference, and partially because I'm not don't consider myself a Zizek scholar, just somebody who kind of like pays attention sort of marginally to him. I'm always sort of curious more by the persona than I am by his like cult of personality than I am by the things I understand that he's saying. I made a proposal that I would do 3 presentations all at dawn. So at the time, I checked to see when the sun was rising in Ohio at the time, and it was going to come up at 5:34 in the morning during the conference. So I made this proposal thinking fully that it would just be rejected and that I would be told that this was not a possibility. To my surprise, I was accepted into the conference. All 3 of my lectures at dawn for each day of the conference. And so at that point, I had to then make the work. What ended up happening though was 1 month or 3 weeks before the conference, I was notified that the conference center didn't open until 8:30 in the morning. And so I was now stuck with a presentation that I had to do that I wanted to do at 5:30 in the morning at dawn that I couldn't do because the conference center wasn't open. And so as many universities do, we have a car fleet. And so I rented the largest car that I could order without having to have a special license, which was this Chevy Suburban that you see in the center here. And I screen printed some pretty magical posters that advertised the lecture at dawn in this van. And I plastered them all over the conference site and then waited on the first morning to give the lecture. Nobody showed up the first day, but as you can see by the bottom pictures, I still delivered the lecture. There's 3 pictures here that show me reading, well, actually 2 pictures that show me reading, one of the empty Suburban, and then one of me showing Yves Klein's Leap into the Void. That happened for the second night also, but what interestingly enough, there started to be a buzz around the conference where people were coming up to me and saying, "Hey, you're the guy who's delivering those lectures in the middle of the morning, right?" And I would say, "Yeah." And of course, everybody would say, "Well, I wish I could have come, but we went drinking yesterday." So they did the conference thing, which was like they couldn't get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. But on the last day of the conference, I delivered the lectures faithfully to no audience. And then the very last day, 4 people showed up. And that's the last image that you see there. And I delivered the lecture to them, which fortunately for them included also a small tour of Cincinnati. I drove them around in the car while listening to a recording of me reading from some Zizek passages. Another piece that, for me, the idea was, how do you take this thing which seems unpliable and try to bend it, try to make it soft, try to test its pliability through all of its material aspects, whether it was time, scheduling, bureaucracy or logistics, and then also the dynamics of presenting in a conference. In a similar vein, when I was hired at the University of Illinois, I was given an office in a corridor that was mainly filled with faculty offices, but it's a corridor that is frequented by students. It's the main corridor of the art school. It's frequented by students, but all of the offices are kind of impenetrable. They have, tinted windows, as is logical. And so students don't usually go into faculty offices unless they have a meeting. So what I did was I made a placard for the office door where I made 2 pieces inside of the office. One was called Office's Artwork, and it was a ready-made, so it was just described everything that was inside of the office. And the second piece was a piece called Split My Lunch, which was every Tuesday at around 12:15, 12:20, I would come prepared with a double lunch. Like I would try to make the best lunch possible, really delicious sandwiches with, San Pellegrino and like olives and all these really wonderful things. And whoever showed up at 12:20, I would then split my lunch with them. And this was actually an amazing way. My intention was to try to make the office more porous and the university office more porous. And that is in fact what ended up happening. I started to meet undergraduates and graduate students and faculty and staff and people who worked in the building, simply because I was just this, and the cost obviously may have been too high for some of them, but it was just to have a conversation with me for an hour. And they could eat however much of the lunch that they wanted. That actually transformed into this ongoing piece, which is called the Jorge Lucero Study Collection, which for me is inspired by the Roger Brown Study Collection, which was a sort of formative thing that I saw at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago when I was a student there. And basically what it is it's open access hours to everything that's in my office, sometimes on Mondays, sometimes on Tuesdays, depending on how my teaching schedule goes. And basically I've figured out the arrangement of the office in a way where I can have the actual working space, meaning the part where my desk is, in a place that's completely hidden and out of the way from the rest of the office. So people can come into the office and for all intents and purposes, not even see that I'm there, and just, hang out in the office, look at the things in the office. There's obviously books, but artworks, there's ephemera, there's a collection of artist books that I have. Obviously lots of leftover toys from all of my children discarding them, journal, magazines, periodicals, et cetera, et cetera. It's a study collection. And then there's this sandwich board sign that I usually hang outside of I usually put outside in the hallway so that people know that it's open. These are all, everything that's in the collection is things that I have gathered, things that I have collected. One interesting gift that we've gotten, we don't usually take gifts, we take artworks, but we don't usually take items like archival items. But I got a phone call one time from a colleague of mine who was retiring and leaving the university, the art historian Jonathan Feinberg, and he said, "Hey, I heard you have this collection and I have some art magazines. Do you want them?" And I thought, well, they're Jonathan Feinberg's magazines, so I might as well take them. But what I didn't know was that they were 50 years worth of 10 different subscriptions. And so when I had to get the van, put all the seats down in the van in order to bring all the magazines into the office. So this is all of the magazines, or a majority of the magazines, which are now in a closet in the office. So they're kind of hidden, they're not in the way like this. But really it was something that I didn't know what to do with. And people had always been asking me to show the office in some way. And I've always refused because it's an immersive space. It's something you come into. It's not something that gets exhibited. It's not really an object in that way. But when I was I was in this exhibition, I thought that the magazines could be something that I could show. So I got all of these bookshelves from the university salvage, and I created this sort of Donald Judd-esque sculpture in the center of the exhibition space, and then people could come in and sift through 50 years worth of Jonathan Feinberg's magazines. And if you know Jonathan Feinberg, you know that he wrote, Art Since 1945, which is this sort of germinal, art, modern to contemporary art text that everybody uses in like their survey classes, or a lot of people use in their survey classes. So I thought that this was a way of sort of like almost like dismantling that book by showing all of the magazines that Jonathan Feinberg had in his collection. Of course, the most curious thing was that at the exhibition, nobody saw it as an artwork. They just saw it as some kind of information desk or something. So people during the opening were like leaning on it, putting their purses on it. The security guards were having they were freaking out because they weren't sure how this was supposed to be treated. They approached me and I said, no, of course, this is what it's supposed to happen. People are supposed to not even think of it as a work. That actually encouraged me to send the piece somewhere. I was invited by a professor at the University of North Texas to show the collection, and I said no. And then she said, can you send us one shelf's worth of things? Because I want one of my classes to work with it. And I said no. And I told her why, because I thought it was kind of an immersive thing. And then she said, what if I raise the money to bring the whole thing? And so then I said yes. And so we packed it up. And we sent it to I drove it actually 12 hours to the unit from Champaign to the University of North Texas. And then it sat there for a semester. So I don't have any pictures of this, but my office essentially looked like a chicken carcass after, like one of those roasted chickens where you peel off all the meat and then you just have the bones. That's what my office looked like. And then this is what the University of North Texas art education meeting space looked like. And they worked with everything in the collection throughout a whole semester. And then I showed up at the end of the semester, and all the students did presentations around what they found in the collection. It was mostly about their research, but through the collection. I'm going to speed you up a little bit here just so I don't take up too much time. In the same sort of spirit of trying to find where the porousness of things are, where things bend, how they could be made pliable, there's a sort of central motivation that I have in my teaching, and it has to do with with the question of where does expertise lie? Where is it centered? And I'm usually always thinking that I have some expertise. I never discount my own expertise, but I also have many blind spots and deficiencies, and I bring those into the classroom. And I try to teach my students, show them actually that they also have expertise and that they have blind spots, and that in this kind of horizontality, we can actually have we can create a mutual education. And one of the main ways that I do it is by doing this project called Teach Anything, where in a teaching methods course, I give the students the opportunity to teach whatever they want out of their expertise for about 20 minutes. And so each student comes in and does a 20-minute. I don't give them any prep in terms of how to teach. I just say, teach from your expertise. So here's Carla teaching the Heimlich maneuver in CPR. Here's a student who's teaching us how to give a perfect back rub, shoulder rub. Here's a student teaching us the choreography to Michael Jackson's Thriller. Here's a student teaching us how to identify different clouds in the sky. She created this little index for us that was like a viewfinder. And then now on Zoom, we're still doing it. Here's a student who's teaching us yoga. Every semester we have somebody who teaches us yoga. Here's a student who is teaching us where are the safest spaces to study on campus. Here's a student who gave us a lecture about the connections between front lawns and classism. Here's a student who talked about different kinds of, about bullying and anti-bullying strategies. Here's a student who told us about different kinds of resins and how to price them out, how to think about them in terms of their yellowing quality. And then here's a student who taught us how to post a dance video to TikTok. And these are just a few out of the hundreds of examples of Teach Anything. And it's all, again, based on this idea that they actually know how to teach. They've been learning how to teach ever since they had their first teachers, their parents. They've been watching teaching methods. So that really what it is, it's just about situating where expertise lies and how that expertise can be shared. And in the same vein of this, I did this project at Compound Yellow, which is in Oak Park, right outside of Chicago. It was called the Your Stuff Museum. It's a pretty self-explanatory thing. It was set up as a kind of folk museum where people could come in and share from their personal expertise. And Compound Yellow is a place where this kind of thing already happens, where they have like gardening sessions and concerts and libraries and workshops. And so I just sort of ratcheted that up and created a context in which people could put on a museum of their stuff to tell their stories. And the only thing that we asked of them was that if you were going to show your stuff, that you would put on one moment of educational programming. And for that, we offered these tutorials. So I wrote these, how to curate your stuff, how to make an installation of your stuff, and then finally, how to create educational programming for your exhibition. And that could be anything from a tour of your stuff, a lecture, a family history lecture, a lecture about the things that you own, some type of discussion where you were talking, again, from your expertise about your things. It really like an adult show and tell. I'm just going to end with this. In the institution lately, post tenure, I guess, or even before tenure, I've had a really intense interest in figuring out how many people we can jam into one project or how many people we can jam around one thing. so that we feel like we've constructed it instead of it being led by one person. And these are just 3 examples. This is one, an article that we published in the journal Art Education, where we just lifted a whole conversation out of Facebook, and around this idea, Abraham Cruz Villegas' idea of autoconstrucción, we presented a sort of joint essay that was written already from something we had done already, which is a Facebook conversation. I wrote a book. This is the book, Teacher as Artist in Residence, the most radical form of expression to ever exist, with 30 some teachers from the Washington, D.C. metro area at the Kennedy Center. And that book was written all out of the teacher's expertise. So there is an essay at the beginning, which was the lecture that I delivered. It's a version of the lecture that I delivered at the beginning. But the idea was, how do you collate all this expertise and turn it actually into a book? And how do I do it for them in the most painless way possible? And then finally, last summer, we had this symposium, which there's a forthcoming book for it, called What Happens at the Intersection of Conceptual Art and Teaching. It was a 6-hour and 10-minute symposium where 39 different scholars and artists and teachers from all over the world came in and took a shot at this question for 10 minutes. And so these are just some, this is just a little bit of documentation of some of the presentations that happened during that day. And then finally, a little bit of a spread from the forthcoming book, which we're in the, I don't want to say who we're negotiating with, but we're finding a home for it right now. So that's me. Hopefully I didn't go too fast.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you, Jorge.
Thank
You're
you.
giving us ideas here for our next symposium. Yeah, I usually were planning this one, but let me introduce Irina so we can move on. Just a second, Irina. All right, here we are. Okay. Irina Aristarkhova is professor at the STEM's School of Art and Design in the Digital Studies Institute, where she serves as the director of graduate studies. They are both at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. She has published widely on the intersection of gender, technoscience, and culture. In her first book, Hospitality of the Matrix, Philosophy, Biomedicine, and Culture from 2012 and translated into Russian into 2017. And in her second book, Arrested Welcome, Hospitality in Contemporary Art, which, by the way, is just sitting right here, still use it a lot. This is from 2020. Aristarkhova has developed novel feminist approaches to theories and practices of hospitality, including in art and biomedicine. Prior to Michigan, Aristarkhova taught at Penn State University's School of Visual Arts and Women's Studies Department. She also taught at the National University of Singapore, where she was a founding director of the Cyber Arts and Cyberculture Research Initiative. And I have to say that when I went to the website to look at her bio, I was super impressed by how many affiliations, faculty affiliate of so many programs in Michigan. So fantastic work. Irina, we have you in Penn State still. Well, I'll be quiet.
Yeah,
I'll be
the same
quiet
here. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe. Thank you so much, Simona, for a great introduction. And thank you to Professor Lucero, Jorge. It's an honor to co-present. I'm going to start sharing my screen. I have a short PowerPoint, which I will skip. But first I will skip a few slides so that we can move to the conversation sooner. But I also want to post something in chat for us, so that it's about the recent podcast that Jorge and I did for the University of Minnesota Press, where we had a wonderful, I must say, I really enjoyed our conversation because it opened up so many interesting questions for me, rather than serving only as the end point of the book, but rather than entry point into new conversations about the role of the artist in today's society, and what contemporary art and art theory contribute to much larger debates about the human condition and its current moment. In our podcast, we also talk about how food and other material practices, resources, including resources of the body and its energy, its disposition or its gesturing, the very sensory material of hospitality, become the center point of its sustainability and politics. And today I want to share a selection of art projects that I wrote about in the book and end with a few words of why hospitality and why today. I think that there is some problem with moving. Let me try this. Can you see this next slide? Okay. Over several summer mornings in 2012, two young artists, Esther and Jack, from a Russian art group Tesame, translation, those ones, held up signs with large printed letters that said, "Good morning," and "Moscow, smile." It was directed at passengers in the St. Petersburg and Moscow metro stations who smiled in response or just passed by them without looking. The artists wore smart suits, as you can see, and carnival masks as they welcomed citizens of the cities. One of those days, as several local media outlets reported as well, the artist had been removed by policemen. As you can see, a policeman approaching on this slide. As one newspaper explained, and in a loose translation of the social media post, police officers told the artists who recorded their conversation, quote, "Citizens have no right to address strangers and wish them a good morning," end of quote. A passerby interviewed by a local TV crew expressed dismay, quote, "What kind of a city do we live in? It was nice to have someone wish me good morning as I was rushing to work. They did not bother or obstruct anyone." Police officers then explained that their actions are a matter of public policy. Quote, "Right now, you cannot express your opinion about certain social values in public without getting official permission in advance," end of quote. So to invite others to smile needs a permission. The implication is that to greet strangers is to threaten the existing social order. In fact, the social media post here says that the policeman actually mentioned something about Putin, that somehow wishing people to smile challenged Putin personally as an act of resistance. In this case, I conclude the welcome was literally arrested. Such minor gestures of hospitality scenes, greetings, smiles, small talk, and the like, or what I call micro-courtesies in the book, and what the artist Anna Provatsky calls social lubrication in her own work of social design, that are increasingly engaged in the discussions about our immediate lived environment. Indeed, my chapter 1, Reclaimed Civility, Anna Provatsky, addresses critical issues surrounding etiquette and civility as crucial and controversial elements of hospitality. I would like to move to show you Provatsky's work now. Finding row. I analyzed Provatsky's project, The Greeting Committee Reports, which was part of her work for the Documenta 13 exhibition in Kassel, Germany in 2012. There were two parts of the project. First, Provatsky, with the help of professional etiquette consultants, trained more than 800 exhibition staff members in conflict management, de-escalation, and other social lubrication techniques. Borderline inappropriate and deeply provocative, this work in etiquette studies and social design, in addition to civility training, also consisted of short professionally produced videos on how to respond to awkward situations. Let me try. I hope that you will be able to hear. Could you hear that? Let me just do quickly this again. Share sound, optimize for video clip. How is it now? Can you hear now? Excellent. I'll just start again.
Whoa, hey, babe.
Pratyuhi, how do we measure personal space?
Personal space is connected to a sense of privacy, and it varies on customs and social habits. You can roughly measure it 20 inches or 50 centimeters in or out at arm's distance.
So what is the polite thing to do if someone repeatedly keeps bumping you with your bag?
Turn around, smile sincerely, and to neutralize your negative feelings, say something nice. That's a nice bag.
There are a few more videos, and what you could see is that they were also, these videos, unlike the training of the staff members, were professionally produced on how to respond to awkward situations and shown on public television during the exhibition. So people who were standing in a queue like this could actually be trained and already practice immediately those new skills. The work, as it tries to teach how to be welcoming and prepare oneself for the arrival of guests, creates uneasiness and demonstrates the profound anxiety caused by hospitality practices as one prepares to serve and be always ready as a good communist citizen and becoming. Hence Pravachki's title, The Greeting Committee Reports. And in the chapter, I also sought to unsettle an easy critical dismissal of civility on political grounds as something only complicit. I argued, as have Bell Hooks and David Farrell Krell, that there is more to smiles and greetings, and that I defined in the introduction through welcome as resistance. Going back to my PowerPoint now. The next work, I'm going to skip through some of it, next work, and jump to chapter 3. In chapter 3, I talk about the man who, which is called The Man Who Welcomes, Slimming Wei. I address the extensive body of creative work by contemporary Taiwanese American artist Slimming Wei and examine his aesthetics of hospitality in detail. I focus primarily on 3 of his works: the Sleeping Project that you can see on the right, the Dining Project on the left, and the Living Room. The last of these projects has become a permanent living room in the new wing of Boston's Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, designed by Renzo Piano in collaboration with the artist. In Lee's work, the amount and quality of resources, such as food and its presentation or a room and its design, together with the demeanor and caring of the host, reveal aesthetic concerns of welcome as inherently connected to its ethics and to a relationship one-on-one. I show how Lee challenges previous hospitality traditions by presenting a model of a welcoming man. And that part of the book also raises questions of architectures of hospitality, and whether museums could be converted into democratically and institutionally hospitable places. I'm going to skip a couple of works. I would like to end with a couple of points which I made when the book was launched last year at the virtual launch. Today, in this pandemic time, hospitality reveals material resources of its practice, such as one's immediate surroundings, so to speak, one's living circumstances, also known as shelter, place that you inhabit, the physical and mental energy you have, the amount of money in the bank, the body states of hunger, fatigue, and comfort are all very much a zero-sum game. They can be depleted. Here in this slide, you also see my more general, I would call it impatience, and see my book adding to a growing number of texts that demonstrate a particular kind of impatience, and also my strong conviction that contemporary art practices offer alternative visions of being in the world. Far from considering welcome as a solution to all problems in uncritical, naive ways, I think contemporary, that feeling of now, and its aesthetic challenge together with ethical challenges, question our inherited hospitality practices that have long been prescribing who gets to be welcomed the most and who is seen as unworthy of our welcome. For me, it is a contemporary moment that represents the time of change. Contemporaneity in that sense is not only a descriptor of a disciplinary location of my book, for example, in the library or an online archive, but a testimony to the insistence on this urgency of now. In that regard, I am closer to the artist Stephanie Dinkins, who speaks about Afro-Nowism in her recent development of that concept. In addition to Afrofuturism, there is so much to capture in the shared ontology of this moment, in the energy of our living right here and right now. I appreciated very much when an early reader of the book wrote to me last year that they immediately thought about the book upon hearing on the news of how a man in Washington, D.C. sheltered over 70 of Black Lives Matter protesters in his home to protect them from imminent arrest. His name is Rahul Dubey. He demonstrated a kind of impulsive hosting, similar to the story that I opened with the introduction. But this book is not a naive celebration of various gestures of hospitality, no matter how radical they are. As incredible, for example, as Rahul Dubey's action was of opening his door to 70 people who were almost to be arrested, the global news around this story are indicators of a problem, I think, that when what seems to not be a big deal in other circumstances, giving shelter to someone in need, is seen as transgressive because hospitality has shrunk to an industry, a system for those who already feel entitled to and demand or buy every welcome the world has to offer. I write about art practices that start from the mundane, everyday life decisions of seemingly low-stake hellos and smiles and waiting and opening the door as they get mobilized into politics of hosting of human and non-human life. Those events reveal ourselves to ourselves as much as the world to us and us to the world. That is why hospitality practice and contemporary art for me go together. And I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. So nice to hear about the book and about the examples. What I said about Irina, Jorge, applies to you as well. You know, I wish you were still with us here too. It would have been great. But I'm thinking of both presentations, both Jorge and Irina, in relation to what we're going to need our institutions to become right around the corner after, you know, post-COVID, the porosity, the flexibility, and we know that what this did to us was sort of a lift the veil. I heard this expression today, lift the veil of the inequalities, that if we have access to good speed internet and computer, we are all in the same room, right? But if you don't, how do you catch up? So the university now is paying attention to issues of accessibility, and inequality became like these basic things that you didn't pay as much attention before, but it's going to be key now. Also designing spaces like you're doing with your office, Jorge, you know, and opening up all kinds of possibilities. So I think you guys have been in the forefront of this for a while and should be inspiring directions that we are going to have to take, you know. So thank you. I'll let you talk a little bit.
Irina, I have to say that I was feeling some conviction in the final moments of what you were talking about, when you were talking about the example of this man who let all of those protesters into his house, because right now my wife and I the family, we're looking for a new house. And so even just this morning, we went to go see a house, and we've been doing this. The market's not that great, but we've been looking at a lot of different houses. And it occurs to me how many of our conversations, this is the conviction I was having, that I was feeling convicted that we have had so many conversations about gates, fences, property limits, and sightlines. So like, who can look into your house from what angle? Where is that bush? Like, and how does it protect you from like your neighbor being able to look into your house, or you being able to look out, right? Or who's walking by your house? Where is this house situated, depending in terms of traffic, schools, foot traffic, sidewalks. So many, but all of these things have to do with either, well, to not make it seem so mean, I would say that maybe it has something to do with wanting to be in control of the privacy, right? Or wanting to be in control of who gets in and who gets out. So it's not about never letting anybody in. It's just about wanting to be the person who says, okay, now you can come in.
Thank you. It's indeed, it's everywhere. What I learned from artists is this pushing of those boundaries for me, right? That, for example, Liming Wei, in a way in which that his sleeping project, for example, right? And what does that pushing of boundaries mean? Like in your case, right, when you moved the entire collection, that pushing of boundaries with that other faculty member, rather than giving up and saying, right, I would respect what the artist says they want to do, made you feel like worthy, right? Worthy of that effort. And in response to that gesture, you drove your collection, right? So I'm interested in those kind of moments where artists, what you showed to me with that work, right? How artists, and it's all material indeed, right? It's about fatigue, it's about driving, it's about thinking how to arrange things. So when I asked Liming Wei, what changed when you were a poor student, graduate student doing the dining project, to Lombard Fright Gallery in New York, or when the same project was done, I believe, in Taiwan, in a major museum, he said, I had better money, I had more money, and I had better quality food to serve my guests, right? To serve people. So indeed, that sense, I think that the artists bring in that kind of quality. If you think about China, right? And in Anna Provatsky's work made me think about how we prepare for most prized guests and who those people are, right? And so I think for me, I think thinking through contemporary art practices enables those sensorial, material, right, aesthetic kind of qualities of what it means to be put at the front, rather than at the back of, ideals. How am I the most, the best host, or the most ideal person in that regard? And indeed, it's earlier today, Helen, for example, Helen Aliri the artist here was talking about making paper, right, or making dice, and and where that tradition comes from. And traditionally, people who benefited from the best material with the best cloth in their sofas were indeed class. There was so much about class there. And what do we do with that tradition, right? That some people who feel entitled to feel so welcomed in the world, we're kind of trying to push it now. That's why hospitality now, I don't feel like I don't have patience anymore, right? I don't want to live always thinking about that the next generation, we would shake those entitlements to hospitality.
Can I ask a question of something actually that I don't think we discussed during the podcast, so this would be a good way to not repeat ourselves, but especially because watching the Pravachki video, you didn't hear me because I was on mute, but I was laughing while it was happening. And it just occurs to me how much that humor, we didn't talk about humor in the podcast, right? And how much humor is a huge part of perhaps imparting those lessons of general, like, I don't know, creating, it's a kind of welcoming gesture also, like a welcoming into the lesson of good manners, or the lesson of the social lubricants. It's almost like they really only work if you're laughing while it's happening.
I agree that it could be counterproductive too, right? And again, it's someone who is very comfortable with oneself, right? As someone who is not necessarily feeling. Imagine if the same person would be made invisible, right, in a queue 5 or 10 times a day, at the 11th time. And that's what I think micro courtesies versus microaggressions, that's what we're talking about, because the burden, the weight of being run over in a little way, and made invisible, made unwelcomed 10 times a day. And that's why I think that your work interests me so much too. I actually had a question to you as well, if it's on, if I may, and about this knowing about teaching permission when you ask students to teach anything they have expertise in. I found that sometimes giving freedom within a classroom around an assignment creates a certain kind of no instructions anxiety. And I wanted to check with you how you deal with that. Do you show them what it looks like, or
No,
the projects usually turn out very well, but that initial moment where there is anxiety, do you have students push back?
Well, I might say, I might give them I don't show them, I'll tell you that much, but and in fact, sometimes I mute that page on my website so that they're not, in case they're going around looking, they won't find the examples. But I might say something like, and I'll just give them two polar opposites. So I'll say something like, a student a couple years ago taught us how to make guacamole, which to me is maybe the most easy thing you could teach anybody to do. Just smash the avocados. Even if you don't put anything else in, you made guacamole, right? That's one. So I maybe give the cooking as a kind of pedagogy, that they're like cooking show, like they're familiar with it. And then I'll give something very extreme, or I should say not extreme, but something really exciting that somebody did that was really maybe absurd. So I'll actually give an example from when I was a grad student at Penn State, and I was teaching this assignment there because nobody was watching me. And somebody took us on a tour of their favorite trees at Penn State. Like they took us, we went around campus, and she showed us all of her favorite trees. And so I'll give that example, because that example not only is so simple, in what it's doing, but it's taking us outside of the classroom, which is an immediate break in the way that they might think that they need to instruct us, right? So, and I just say the only thing you have to do is you have to use the full 20 minutes or 25 minutes, depending on how much time I give them. And I say to them, I have a high tolerance for awkward silence. So if you finish 18 minutes early, those other 7 minutes are your minutes. I'm not going to step in, rescue you, cut off the class, do anything. You have to finish those 25 minutes. And so one of the things that they usually do is they over prepare. And so that really, it's sort of like they get to feel out their first teaching experience in this way. But because they're teaching from something they're very familiar with, they usually come very prepared. Like they can even think off the top of their head on something to do next if they go too fast or if they're going too slow, and then they have to make it crunch into. I mean, it's really a wonderful exercise in conditioning for that moment. But I try to limit my instructions to them by just using my own ability to withstand terribleness.
Thank you. Simone, did you have, I thought
No,
I
I
saw
was
your
just
hand.
saying that I remember when he did that work at Penn State. I think was presented. I saw it somewhere. In any case, Jorge, I was thinking that even if they don't find the examples in your website, being your student, they already expect something. You know what I mean? Like you have a reputation probably, and they have an idea of what is possible.
Mhm.
So I think there's a context. There's always a context, right?
Mhm. Yeah. I was reading, let's see, this book, which is, it's Luis Chemnitzer's One Number is Worth One Word. And it's a collection of all of his educational essays. And then one of the essays, he was making a distinction between the word instruction and construction. And he was talking about how instruction it's the thing that we're familiar with, which is giving directions, giving instruction, passing information along. But construction is a more horizontal activity where you bring someone next to you to make the thing, right? And I think if these students can identify anything in what I do, is that I try to start with the spirit of that we're in it together, that I'm not there as the judge of their activity, that I'm more there as someone who has been in this activity before, and so I can serve as a guide sometimes, but that their ideas and their presentations and their work and their experience is just as valuable as anything else that anybody else could bring, particularly me, into the room. So by dismantling that almost immediately, I think it does allow, because the first thing they always want to know, Irina, is how do I do what do I do? Like what they want to do is do it right. And what I want to say is the only way you do it right is letting the 25 minutes pass. So even if you take 10 minutes and there's a 15 minutes where we do nothing, that's fine. Like the 25 minutes passing is you did it correct.
I have a question for Jorge, but I want to know if Irina wants to ask something first.
No, I have a later question potentially about how technology figures out and some of that. And I didn't catch, especially the current book, maybe indeed to talk, ask Jorge to talk about more about Facebook and.
Okay, I'll let you go there because it's about the books too. Go ahead. I'll let you go first. Yeah, go ahead.
What is the question, Irina?
Yeah.
Why don't you, Simone, ask first while I'm formulating?
Well, one thing that I was thinking, Jorge, was in relation to technology, which I think Irina is going to mention. You know, I was thinking if the sensibility of the students you have are already parsed in a certain way of navigating the world that is not linear, and it is just about putting together a lot of information, and they have to just to enter with something, you know. Then I was thinking about the performative book that you had, they're teaching as performance. So if you have to occupy 25 minutes, yesterday I was saying that, you know, the way I was trying to deliver a paper, to be in a conference, is just so much more formal and controlled that I wish I had done, you know, improv or stand-up comedy or something in preparation for teaching, because I feel that I don't have the skills anymore, you know, that you needed something that is so completely more flexible and thinking on your feet, real time all the time, and not delivery of any pre-digested content, you know. So I was thinking about that, that this project works well with your students also because it meets their sensibilities, the ones that they're bringing already. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say you would think so. You would think so, but I was really surprised actually at how many students, and we're talking about these born digital students, this semester. Like I was really surprised at how well, surprised and not surprised, but it's understandable that they've been really repulsed by the year in Zoom. Like they're not interested in it. Like they do live their lives digitally, I think, but on their terms, in the things that they're interested in the ways that in the apps that they're interested in, the entertainment they're interested in. And school in Zoom is not that. Like it doesn't provide that that for them. And I don't know that we've given them enough rein to make this that. I'm interested in it. I certainly am interested.
Should we? Yeah, I'm interested too, you know.
Yeah, and I certainly don't have any loyalty to school on Zoom in terms of the traditions of school. I mean, I don't really have those loyalties in the brick and mortar school. So I have them less in the Zoom room. And we have had some really interesting conversations about the pliability of this
virtual space.
Virtual space. And I think they desire it, but they also they haven't gone there in their imaginations either though.
Interesting. Yep. Which is something that Irina probably saw also, right? Irina, this evolution of what cyber art or cyberspace. So we were doing yesterday, somebody did a walk on the beach, and we had, I mean, using Zoom real time to look at, you know, animals and stones and the ocean. And I was thinking of the early, you know, telepresence, you know, the line fall, and you have all this, freeze the screen, a connection is not smooth, and this is all part of the performance. So what has changed for you, you know, from, let's say, the 2000s to now, 20 years of following, right? So these are just open questions. You take whatever ones you think make sense, but I'll let you talk to Jorge.
It's indeed, we have 1 minute left to
I didn't look. I looked now, 2 minutes left. I'm so sorry.
No, it's no problem. It's actually good to notice. That's one good thing about Zoom, that right, we don't go on forever anymore, as we could, and it's not great. I would say that for me there was a revelation when my mother, who does not use, I often think about my mother when I think about this cyberspace and the internet, because she does not use cyberspace. She does not know what the internet is. Right. So, and she's kind of, for me, a reality check in terms of where we are. And last year, when I could not be there, and we have a very close relationship, emotionally, for the first time, my sister used her phone because my mother was impatient with technology. She was not interested in face-to-face video. And for the first time, she did it because she said that I forgot your face.
Oh.
And when she saw it, that was like a person who recognizes what we've been living already, right? And how I've been teaching. And for her, it was amazing, and it was a great discovery. And after 2 or 3 times, she said, "It's okay, let's go back to phone. I've seen your face, now I know how your face looks." So thank you. But indeed, it's a conversation, I think, for maybe the next year. Let's, find a way to continue it, because I'm also interested in technology and hospitality.
Mhm. Wonderful. So unfortunately, we have to say goodbye. I wish we could at least hug, right? We can talk, we can get close, face to face, but I miss hugs, guys. So next time we see, let's try to do it in the same
I
space.
know.
Oh,
Irina, the next time you're driving through State College, come find me. Come
yeah.
find me.
Yeah.
Let's all, Jorge, let's all drive through State College one
sounds
of
good.
these days.
Oh,
Yeah.
Let
Thank
me
you
know
so
when I
much.
fly.
there's
Thank you,
so
guys.
much. I'm sorry I had to jump out, but I had to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye
Thank
now.
you so much. Very good
Thank
to
you,
be here.
everybody.
Next time.
Bye
Thank you,
bye.
guys.
Thanks for inviting. Bye bye.
Bye.